I listened to a series, a little talk. I can't remember the guy, like Matt something. He was doing a talk on this book he was reading called First Class Passengers on a Sinking Ship. And I don't know too much about the book, but when he was talking about it, he said basically the author, who's like a big historian, was formulating like a theory on how empires collapse, and his point of view was that the empires collapse mainly due to um, elite infighting, and then that makes the system incapable of adapting to the changes in the environment. So, and I'm pretty sure the whole political polarization is probably a kind of reflection of that, of the rulers just infighting over how to solve quote these problems, and ultimately it's going to cause everything to break up. I'm not too sure if that's correct, but it seems to have some truth in it.
Yeah, I can't help thinking that 5 years from now we're uh, going to look back at 2022 and the Ukraine wars with kind of an envy, or those were the good old days, where everything was normal. So even though it's a really, really,
Oh, going south, you muted.
We lost you. You're
all
muted.
right. I wasn't saying anything interesting anyway, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's really hard to read the whole Ukraine thing. I don't know. I do agree, though. Yeah, you're right. I think it will be. We will look back and think, geez, yeah, that wasn't too bad those days. But yeah, it's definitely it's weird how the narrative has shifted. Actually, even in the mainstream media the other week, they were showing all of when Putin did when they did the referendum and they did all the votes, and then they were out celebrating, like, and of course it was like 98% for Putin. And even on the Western media, they were showing all the celebrations and everything, which I thought was, well, I was listening to some other people and they were saying, yeah, that is pretty crazy, because the Western media has been just, they don't want to show anything of Putin at all, really, anything that could make him look like he's having a good time in that. And of course, it was huge celebrations, and they were singing the national anthem, and they had thousands of people. Well, I mean, obviously, maybe some of them paid to be there, but out in Moscow or St. Petersburg, celebrating. And you kind of think, yeah, maybe they are thinking, fuck, like, this isn't how we wanted it to go. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know how anyone can really know. The propaganda on both sides is immense, but I definitely think that they blew up that pipeline, and I think the Americans did that because they don't want. The whole thing about this war is that Germany was getting too cozy with Russia, and America doesn't want that. So, and of course, Russia wants to kick America out of Europe. So, but the idea that they want a huge land grab, I mean, they've got plenty of land. I suppose there is definitely the point that if you're coming back to the energy thing, there was a lot of that south eastern region of Ukraine, I think, is quite energy rich. I think there's quite a lot of things there that we never really knew about that are needed in the local economy. I didn't even realize, I think there's like a plant there that produces, it's one of only two that, was it a nitrogen plant or so, or some sort of, there's a gas for making an element for making the neon gas that is then, and they make it at this factory, and then that neon gas is used for the lasers for etching microchips. One of only two of the main suppliers in the world, apparently. So that was in, I think, that region, part of one of the regions that Russia took hold of. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things under the surface, but from the money point of view as well, I think Putin has definitely played a blinder. It's clear that the Russian economy is not doing too bad. Yeah, okay, they don't have McDonald's anymore, and they don't have some of the luxuries they used to have, but they've been cutting interest rates. And I don't know, I've heard a British guy who's living over there, and he said, yeah, it's not too bad. Like, yeah, there's a few things you can't get anymore, but generally things seem all right. He's living in St. Petersburg. So yeah, and I don't think prices have gone up as much as they have, like, in our countries. So yeah.
Yeah, if you if you look at the word or the concept of geopolitics, it's what Tom said is totally right. Geopolitics is on the most basic level, it's how politics is shaped by where countries and continents are. How the planet looks physically, and then you have what you call sort of Atlanticist or kind of ocean-based countries like England is the best example, but also America is in that kind of thing. And the greatest land masses are Eurasia, right? With Asia and Europe being joined. And if you read some books and text about geopolitics, it's almost like the main object of at least Western geopolitics is to prevent Russia, which has all the raw materials, from cooperating with Germany, which has all the brains and the know-how and the technical skills. So, and of course, a basic part of geopolitics is the good stuff, which in our days like the fossil fuels, gas and oil and stuff. So preventing Russia from selling the good stuff, the energy, to Germany and Western Europe, that is kind of geopolitics 101. If you read one of those books 10 or 20 years ago, which I did because I was in some kind of geopolitics discussion club back in Oslo. And as you said, Tom, blowing up the pipeline after building it since 2011, that's like, it's been 11 years in the making. And it was, Nordstream 2 was completed all the way to northeast Germany, to Greifswald, where I visited 22 years ago, summer holiday. So it was ready in like September last year. And then it took forever to kind of, what do you call it, accept it or certify it or do all kinds of paperwork for it. And of course, America was no small deal of the problem of how to certify it or accept it and make the paperwork for it, because they didn't want. They've been fighting Nord Stream tooth and nail since 2011, right? And and you had the opening of the Baltic pipe on the day after the explosions. Would you believe it? And they actually cross the pipelines from Russia. They cross at Bornholm, and they go from west from the Norwegian gas fields and to Poland. And the whole point, which I even said in the speeches at the opening ceremony on last Tuesday, the whole point of the pipeline, because it's a totally unnecessary pipeline, the whole point of it is to flip the finger at Russia and make the Russian pipeline unnecessary or superfluous. So it was, just a crazy 2 days with the pipes blowing up on Monday, and then they opened the Norwegian pipeline in Poland on Tuesday. Yeah, so this is kind of a big neon light sign with geopolitics, blinking 24/7 above all these events. These are not kind of small random events. These are planned for decades, and all the rest of it.
Yes, the timing is always fascinating with these kind of things. Yeah, I mean, I remember last year when America pulled out of Afghanistan, and obviously it was a complete shit show. And I just remember thinking, that is huge. That is a really big event. And I don't think it, not for all the reasons that most of the media was saying, oh, this disaster, look, they've left all these people there and they've made a real hash of it. But actually more because it's a signal that, to China and Russia that America's on the run. I mean, they've been on the run for years now. Every single military escapade has gone tits up, really. It hasn't really gone. I mean, when do military escapades ever really turn out how you envisage? But still, not exactly a good list, is it? How things have gone for the American empire in the closing stages. And now you just have these. I mean, if you talk about leaders being psychopaths, but I mean, in terms of the ones that are actually clever and switched on, I mean, you've got to give it to Putin and people like that. If you actually listen to his speech, and his knowledge of history and geopolitics, I think he's quite a master chess guy. I'm not saying I like the guy, but compare him to Joe Biden. I mean, whether or not he's in charge, I don't know. I mean, how can he be? He's just like senile, isn't he? But it's kind of laughable. The other day he was like, "Oh, is so and so in the audience or whatever?" And she's dead. He'd forgotten that, like, one of his closest colleagues. Where's Judy or whatever? It's just like, oh my
Jackie.
god!
I think it was
Jackie. Yeah, where's Jackie? Is Jackie here? Oh my god! Yeah, it's just incredibly funny, but not so funny as well.
I kind of agree with you. With the difference is that I look at, I'm a very old person. You can see my beard is very long and everything. So I remember how politics was, let's say 40 years ago when you watched the news as a kid. So you had all these bright, clever German politicians and Finnish politicians and Kekkonen, and you have people with great integrity and who are real statesmen, right? And I see this even today, with Putin. He's one of these guys. He's kind of the last of the Mohicans. Some people call him the only adult in the room, So instead of for me, instead of putting Putin up on a pedestal as being especially great, I'm more like seeing all these other guys as total morons. You're Liz Truss, who everybody describes as less than average intelligent or something, and you have sleepy Joe Biden, who talks to dead people and even handshakes on the stage with people who are not there.
I think, I mean, the caliber of these leaders has just been declining, I think, along with generally, our civilization and our standards. I think that you could equate many things that are going wrong in a straight line, when you look at the state of the leaders. Now, I think I may be wrong, someone correct me if I am, but I think when Rome fell, I think, gradually the leaders, the people in charge, they just got more and more incompetent, and for whatever reason, maybe because they were being lead poisoned, I don't know, but I think that maybe is a sign, because, you look at certain leaders that we had in the past, and they just were a lot more erudite and switched on. I mean, in our country, it's terrible. But not that I'd ever put much faith in any of the politicians that have been around in my lifetime, apart from, I suppose, the only one that you sort of think, God, he's a bit of a Machiavellian character, and that would be Tony Blair. I mean, he's still got his fingers in power, and he's all over the place. And he's still, very involved with the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and then he's got his, of course, he's being paid by Bill Gates, and so there's still some Western leaders that are probably a bit more. You could give them some credit for being, psychopaths and clever, and sort of, Blair is actually, he's scary, but anyway, let's not talk about politicians.
Well,
but they're just all psychopaths. I mean, if you would ever think about the philosopher king ideal, I don't think anybody who is in their right mind would aspire to be a political leader.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one more thing I want to say is, I did take a peek during the last American presidential election between Biden and Trump, and I only peeked, and I'm like, wow, it's like Goya's painting was put up on the stage of Saturn eating his son, two representatives of Kronos not being able to accept that the sun is setting on their empire.
Or maybe all these people in power are tools placed there by the invisible, unknowable elites. They're just puppets.
Yeah, they're puppets of the meta cortex, the meta alien cortex, aka our larger prison culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, the financiers, these shadowy people that run BlackRock and all these, various corporations clearly have way more power. I mean, they have done for a long time, I think. So I think it's always best to look beyond and say who are the tight-knit group of elites. Well, we kind of know who they probably are. I mean, they're not. They usually do show things in plain sight, but regardless of that, no point in worrying about the day-to-day politics. There's more important things to focus on, I think. So were there any other talking points that we had in terms for this meeting? I'm trying to think if we should move the conversation on to something other that people want to talk about, and instead of the money and the power and the war. But I always end up bringing it back to that.
Well, we had started a conversation last week, but we couldn't record. The recording just failed. So we were having a conversation on a post that was describing a population. Was it in New Guinea? I can't remember. But it was in the Pacific anyway. And there was
Solomon Islands.
Solomon Island, maybe, yes, where the author, an anthropologist, had witnessed within a week a population moving fast from a very connected, nearly hunter-gatherer state to suddenly domination by the alien cortex. And he actually really put that in writing very well, with a description of physical symptoms, but the post is on the link under the meeting today if you want to look at it. But we were going to continue the discussion, but if people haven't looked at the post here, it might be better to push that back for another time. We maybe go back. The other point of the other points that we were thinking last time, that we were going to maybe return to the topic of magic and revisit some of Lionel's works and read a bit of Lionel. That's what we were saying now. It's, as usual, the Extinctionati meeting are without structure, without plan, without organization, and it's really good that way. I think it's nice that we just, go with the flow with whoever's there and brings up, like you, Tom, you had an experience today and it brought on economy and all sorts of other things. So, we should go with the flow, and we've got so many things that we can discuss, and there's so many different people who have different takes here and a different expertise. So I don't really want to go back really on what was last Sunday, because there was I didn't have much time this week to read and do. I was outside and I was doing physical things, and I just couldn't really I was not online, and so my head is not really there. So that's what I had to say. Anybody else has something that they want to bring up?
Yeah, I would like to bring up the dilemma or problem or the concept of sabotage, and then I mean, dark green ecologist sabotage, as opposed to the kind of sabotage we saw last week in the Baltic Sea. As apart from the geopolitical effects of the sabotage, there was also the case that it was the biggest human methane release ever in history. It's like the methane emissions from an entire European-sized country, or like France or whatever, or all the cars of France or something. So it's like you don't want to create an ecological catastrophe if you're doing it for a green activist cause. And I think it's, to me anyway, in my fiction writing mind, it's become kind of a bit more difficult to even write fiction about great green activist sabotage actions after this real life event. It's always like that. I really hate that, because I have many funny ideas about flying drones around Heathrow, and then Roger Hallam goes and does that, and then I don't like it anymore because I see it in real life, So if anyone has any thoughts about, it always seems like we should do something, or activists in the world should do something about these bad things, and then it proves over and over and over again that the normies, the current society, is much better at doing these crazy things, much better and more efficient at sabotaging itself and crashing itself, and accelerating its own collapse. So if anyone has anything to say in that line, I would be interestingly listening to that.
Yeah, I didn't come on here after I did that. I went to that Just Stop Oil thing. That was quite funny. That was a few months back, and it was quite heartening because there was a few young people there. I felt like it was sort of Back to the Future. It's funny that they all seem to be now taking the line that go with more kind of traditional Greenpeace-y stuff, like that was done back in the 80s or the 70s. They were on about going and sitting. I think they already had done some sit-ins at petrol stations, or chaining themselves to fences at power plants or whatever. But I don't know. There was one guy actually who I got talking to, a really young guy, and I didn't go back to the meetings just because I sort of thought this is kind of pointless. All of the, as I think I said on here, or I sent some messages on the Reddit chat actually, and but I was just kind of heartened by the willingness to continue doing that sort of stuff, even though I don't think that's the right tactic anymore. Not on like if you're going to do that kind of stuff, then you'd have to be a bit kryptonite about it, or lone wolf, rather than trying to be actively like an organized group. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of took positives from it, that there was young people there that were willing to sort of quit their studies for the cause. Well, I think the guy actually I'm thinking of, he just finished university, but he was very young. So, but most people there were, it was just kind of, the same old rehash of the original lectures that XR were doing, you know, back in 2018, which I went to the first ones of those. So it was like, what's changed, guys? Like, what? And talking about appeasing to the government. It was like, what? I don't understand. But alongside that, as I say, they were actually talking about doing, well, there was elements of the group that they were saying, yeah, if people really want to go down the hardcore route, we do have sort of route for people that are willing to get arrested and all of that. But anyway, I obviously brought up what Hugh had brought up about the fact that the police crimes bill was coming in, and they'd kind of shot themselves in the foot, because that meant that any protests were going to just be, because it's so broad now, if you turn up, the police can just go, oh, you're making too much noise. And in the actual police crimes bill, it talks about reasons to shut down a protest could be noise. So how do you define that? They could just turn up and be like, there's too much noise here, even though there isn't, and there's no evidence of it, and just close the thing down. And they got very defensive about that. There was one guy there who was not happy with me at all. He just was like, yeah, he said he thought I should leave the meeting. He did not take kindly to me pissing on his bonfire about that they were going to do more protests. So, yeah.
I think what happened in, I think what happened in Western Ireland yesterday got me thinking, because there was a petrol station that blew up. I don't know if it was an accident or whatever. So, but of course,
yeah, there was an explosion. It was on the Gulf.
Yeah,
but it's very sad actually, because there was an awful lot of people.
I know some people were killed. So yeah. of course, the way to do it would be to do it after hours when it's closed and there's no people even cleaning in them or anything. You know, just for my eco-saboteur novel that I'm writing on. So I think it's interesting with the petrol stations, because they are spread all over the Western civilization, or all over the global civilization, really, because it's the lifeblood of this cancerous civilization. Everybody has to have diesel or petrol. And I think it's because it's so, let's say, decentralized, and there is one in every village or town in the world. It would be an easy way to attack or to create a wave of you know, just totally mad young eco-activists lighting them up or something. I'm kind of stunned that it hasn't happened yet. You know, when I was a young eco-activist around the age of Greta, when she started, I was bicycling into town to go to one of these activist meetings, and there was I think it was a Shell station on fire halfway to the city, and everybody was standing around looking, and I stood there with my bike watching this petrol station burn. You know, even the gas tanks underground were burning and exploding and stuff. So I'm just kind of stunned that with the claim that we have had an environmental movement, and that we have a climate movement, I'm really skeptical that we really do have a climate movement, because if people are not sabotaging the petrol stations, do we really have a climate movement on this planet? I would say no.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we do. No.
Yeah,
really.
I was very struck by what's it? Fight Like an Animal, which GS recommended, and I've been listening to the whole podcast from the beginning, and it's the best fucking analysis of everything to do with the climate movement from a guy who's been involved in what was it? Oh God, what was he? Earth First, I think. He was like in America and was a militant activist fighting against pipelines and various deforestation, whatever. It's sort of, again, a heroic protester kind of guy. And he, in one episode, talks about how at the end of the day, if you look at, this is one of the things he mentioned, was the Iraqi insurgency against the United States and the whole organization around them, whatever alternate Iraqi government the United States installed, and saying that you had this sort of very well-armed rebellion of people who were extremely determined to destroy the infrastructure of Iraq's oil industry. And you were talking about like very heavily armed people who are, you know, fighters who didn't care if they lived or died, you know, people who are willing to use the full force of whatever weapons and blowing up stuff that they could. And they couldn't put a dent in the output of the Iraqi oil industry in all that chaos. And talking about how there was this also like a sort of attack on a massive refinery, I think it was, in Saudi Arabia, which again is one of those things that they talk about as a choke point. And they basically disrupted the activity of that refinery for like 2 days or something with some explosion. And so even with the all-out force that could be brought by like a guerrilla war, you can't fucking disrupt the system And whether there are maybe some things that could cause more disruption than that, but the guys seem to very well make the point that there's really, like, you know, there's nothing any individual organization could do at this point against the power of the system it's got all its, you know, shit covered. And I guess, you know, it's just that the collapse under its own weight is the only thing that's going to stop it. And sometimes I think, you know, am I taking this view just because, you know, it's easier for me to say, oh, there's nothing you can do. And this is why, you know, when you talk about the Just Stop Oil people, I look at them and I think, oh, these are really heroic people who are willing to do something. You know, they're doing something and I'm not doing anything. But then as soon as they start going, oh, we're lying here in the road so that we can get windmills and solar, right? And then you just go, oh no, please, fuck off, go away, please be quiet.
Yeah, this was my problem. They could not understand the irony. It's like, look, you understand, like, that civilization is the cause of all of this, and yet you want to have your cake and eat it, which is exactly what Hugh was saying. And they just, you know, and they want to appease to government, and it's like, yeah, we'll get clean energy, we'll get insulation at people's homes, and you're like, no, like, what are you talking about? It's like, you know, you can't, you're just, you're mixing apples and oranges. It's just a stupid philosophy. It's like, yeah, okay, go and get the government to do something. I mean, they know. This is what I try to tell them, but you're just talking to a brick wall. They're not there yet, a lot of them. They were, as I say, the younger people, I think there was a few that were like, oh, pricked up their ears, and they kind of got it, you could tell, but they weren't going to admit in front of the oldies that they were that extreme. And I think that's why I turned them off, because they were like, this guy's too extreme. Well, one of the guys was like, almost, he was really emotional about it. He was like, he was telling this story about how his son and his son's girlfriend had told him on the beach in the summer they weren't going to have children and whatnot because of the climate crisis. And I agreed with him that was tragic, that they thought that was the solution. But then he said, you've got to, you know, we've got to have positivity, like, you know, you've got to just do this, like, there must be hope. And I was trying to tell them to lose all hope, and I probably, my tactics were not as good as I can see why Lord Hugh was a bit of a Marmite character. People either fucking hated him or they so,
well, yeah, it's that whole thing of you don't know how collapse will visit you. It's like I've had people ask me like, what are you gonna do? It's like, well, I don't know exactly what's gonna happen, but I'll just look around me. If grandma needs help crossing the road, I'll help grandma cross the road. If a child is crying, I'll give them a hug. You know, if someone needs help lifting something, I'll help them do that. I'll just look around and see if I can be useful. That's like all I can do as an individual person, you know?
Yeah, back to Tom again. I think what you alluded to is the very important difference between, you know, for the movement, for the radical eco movement. Are we trying to save civilization, or are we trying to make the best situation possible for after the collapse of civilization? To me, that's kind of the cutting edge that I see at the moment, and I think pardon the expression, but I think they are doomed. All the green organizations that are trying to insulate and recycle better and make everything last longer within the civilization period or concept, they are kind of doomed, because their approach or their goals and their tactics are essentially doomed or doomed to failure anyway. So if you're going to risk your life and sit in the motorway or whatever, at least you should do it for some cause that isn't guaranteed doomed. If you understand what I'm saying, I would go on a motorway every day of the week in my youth if there was a cause that had real chance of, you know, making things better. But the only thing I can see, the only possibility I can see, and I'm talking within my fictional novel universe again, the only thing I can see that could start a wave of major change is something like people coordinating on the internet, and then in the middle of the night setting hundreds of petrol stations on fire, and sharing videos anonymously on the internet, and all the cool goth kids or eco activist kids, you know, catching on and spreading this fire of petrol stations around the planet. That's, you know, just a writing idea for a concept.
That's a great plot to your novel. That's a great theme to your novel.
Yeah, and I need more of those. So if you can send me some kind of plot ideas like that for my novel, because I'm trying to make my brain work the best I can. And it's really, really hard, as our discussion also indicates, it's really, really hard to come up with something that really could catch on in that way I'm talking about, and also create some kind of change in the way things play out. I think the only change we really can accomplish, if you have all the resources and all the people we need, the only change that matters that we can accomplish is to collapse the system faster than it would otherwise do. And as I've said over and over again, it seems all the time that the normies are much better, way better at accelerating these things.
That's the problem, isn't it? Because all this talk of accelerationism, and in the last year, the accelerationism has all come from what the government have done, which has all been great news, as you would say, because I mean they really have accelerated things. And I think if there's one positive in that respect from activism, things falling apart more quickly, or opportunities for that to make that happen probably will come about, because there will be tougher times when there'll be more people that are open to realizing, or they'll open their eyes to realizing that the causes of these problems are, civilizational, and that maybe it's not such a great project, and that it needs to come down a peg. So maybe there'll be opportunities to do that in those times. But I mean, just it's insane. Like, you couldn't, as you say, the everyday events are stranger than fiction, really.
It's that analogy Hugh was using, where it's like the alcoholic isn't going to quit, so just give him another 6-pack. But like another thing with the collapse, it's like, the machine's oil crusted heart is about to go into cardiac arrest. So it's like, and when the tendrils of commerce start to retreat, the habitats can start to heal again, like all the ecosystems, they can start healing, and then life can start to return to our shores in more ways than one. The shores of our consciousness, the literal shores of our planet and our land. I mean, I don't want to romanticize it too much, because I know for a fact there's gonna be tons of suffering, but it's like, you just got to navigate. You got to go through. It's like, the reason why I always say I don't know is like, it's possible that I can get unceremoniously killed in urban crossfire violence, but it's like, you don't know. It's like, it's possible, but it's a waste of time to muse on those things, because we ultimately don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it could be very positive times, like, things becoming more localized, and it's a good point, DB. I don't think it's too far off to romanticize it. Maybe we need a bit of that in our lives. It will be incredibly painful. I mean, already, you're hearing about, restaurants and bars and all these places shutting down, but maybe there'll be local, like, drinking dens popping up again, or like little underground things where people can meet, and because they haven't got other things to do now, they can't afford to do this, or they have to borrow someone's, some potatoes from someone or whatever. Like, people will start doing more favors for each other and being able to be more localized and get to know their neighbors a bit more. So I think there will be a lot of positives to come from hard times. I think that's always happening.
If Christians are right and there is a hell, then that's some sort of environment in which I'm forced to get to know my neighbors. That's why I'm not going to last very long.
That's such a blending thing to say.
I think it's important about the suffering aspect, because it's very easy, at least for our enemies, it's very easy to spin that in the direction of evil. When we talk about acceleration, it's the goal of acceleration is to make collapse happen faster, earlier. But I think it's as long as you take the time to understand it properly, it's not a question of suffering or non-suffering. It's a question of an amount, a vast amount of suffering that is going to happen anyway, and it can happen like 20 years earlier, 20 years later. It's going to happen, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. And the carrot, as I was talking about earlier, is that the 20-year difference, let's say, of when civilization collapses, may in fact be the difference between having a chance of a living biosphere and not having a chance, or just having cockroaches, or what do you call those stinging things in the desert? The spiderish, lobsterish things in the desert.
Scorpions.
Scorpions, yeah. You would like to have a biosphere with more than cockroaches and scorpions, and the timing of the collapse of human civilization accelerated by activists or just stupid normies who don't know they are accelerating it. That timing may decide whether you will have a living green biosphere and not just some kind of heat extreme insects left, I believe.
Yeah, and another thing is, I mean, I'm not sure, obviously, because talking about the future in a lot of ways is always futile, but, maybe the system will fall apart before, the oil gets all depleted, They probably won't even be able to deplete it all before it all falls apart. Like, maybe the infighting and the bickering and all that will just cause, everything to just collapse because there's not enough oil. Everyone's fighting over, who controls the flow. The flow is getting smaller. You can just see, like, I'm pretty sure there's like a breaking point where if the flow gets like at a certain area, it won't be worth it anymore and everything just, falls apart. That'd be pretty good if the remaining oil, most of what's left doesn't get burned at all.
Yes, I think we will come to a point after society collapses or during, where people may know that there is still some oil in the tanks up there on the hill, but they have no idea how to get it out of those tanks or into the cars or anything. It's like if all you got left is like a computer game playing Generation Z or Zoomers or something who can't even mend a bicycle, how are they going to utilize that oil up on those tanks? I think we will see a lot of those kinds of situations, maybe.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting how all this unfolds. It's gonna be theater in all the good ways and in all the bad ways.
I think shit show is the word you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. In the big picture, yeah, shit show. But in all the local areas and stuff, it could be a bit of theater watching it and then trying to navigate it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. But it's all it's happening now. We're not in the future. Anyway, as you said, DB, it's futile to talk about the future. What we're observing now, we're riding the wave now. I think seriously, like it's great that we are actually together and we can witness what's happening where we are. But it's as you, I'm a bit of a recluse. I don't know how going south is out there in Groenland, but the signs that you would have in a city, Bob and well, Tom was gone now, would be more flagrant, but it is happening now. It's everywhere. The makeup of the media and the sort of big declarations and the play is still a comedy. It's probably going to become more tragic or tragicomic in the next. Sorry for the noise behind. I'm kind of eating, and 1 second, I'm going to have to to stop there. 1 second.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too because you get into these situations where it's like earlier last week, a coworker was talking to me, and it's the same old boring conversation of work and bills and all that bullshit. And asked me about my living situation. I talked about how, oh, I'm renting, I'm splitting a mortgage, but my roommate owns the house, and he is like, it's unfathomable to him that I'm not like getting my own mortgage or I don't have a car. And he's just like, why don't you have your own? And then as I'm sitting there thinking, well, should I like this guy's like in his 50s, probably thinking about his pension and all that. And I'm sitting there thinking, should I burst this bubble or should I just, let them have their happy delusions until the end? Like, I think even Lord Hugh was having that kind of problem with people in his life. It's like, what do you do in those situations? At the time I just like let him have his thing. I'm like, well, I just like doing this. I just left it that I didn't want to burst his bubble, but it's like, it's hard to know whether or not that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea for mobility, at least. Like 7 years ago, I was like you, I think, DB, because I was renting an apartment in downtown Oslo, and just because I was renting, all I had to do was just pack up or throw away or clean up all my shit, and put my luggage on the train and move west to Bergen, and then a year later move north to, or even further west really, to Greenland. And I think in a time of already accelerating collapse, it's actually an asset to have to own few things, and a house not being one of the things you own, but just renting, which is a bad idea otherwise in the economy. But we're not living in a normal period of history. We're living in the collapse. So being able to pack up on a week's notice or something, and just get the hell out of there and move to somewhere, whether it's game or fish or whatever, I think it's a good asset.
Yeah, but you see, I found myself by the really destiny, really owning a place, because I bought this old shed and I changed it into a house and blah blah. It was not something that I was looking for. I wanted to rent all my life, but now that I'm given this situation, I say, well, people who will pack up and who will leave their rented place, at least they can come to some people who have a place, or at least who are not going to be put out of it because they're not in a city. Wait a second. And you know what I mean? So it's all going to be a tapestry of various scenarios that will probably have to do a lot with destiny and where you are, and without too much control and decision. And things can change. You see, and I understand that what you say, especially when you were in Oslo or people who are in big cities, that I wouldn't be tied to anything there. If I was there, that's for sure. But if you say that you're going to jump on a train and go west, you can do it when the collapse is still at a distance, but in the middle of everything, the trains might not be working. I don't know. It's all different for everyone. The main thing is that we know the main thing is that we are totally aware that it's happening now. It's not in the future. It's now, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking a couple of days ago this week when certain things looked a bit dark, in my private life and stuff. I was thinking that it's important to remind yourself of two things. You have to remember where you are and when you are, basically. And the when bit is, of course, for the few of us who understand it, the when is in the middle of a collapse situation. And for me, the where I am, and these things were supposed to cheer me up, right? When I was saying it to myself. So the where I am is like I'm not living in a flat in Paris or Berlin or Rome or New Mexico or Oslo. That was like 7 years ago. So I'm living in a beautiful area with a lot of fish and game and everything. So I'm kind of ahead of where I would otherwise be. So if everything just goes to shit, I at least don't have to pack up my stuff and go west, because I already did that. And so it's important to have these small tricks to remind you of that things are not totally dark anyway.